Hello everyone, this is Damon with Pixnub Software. In this video, I'm going to be discussing this pause to scale button and also how that differs from the pause on finished image button. There are three pause to scale buttons. You can pause to scale the player, the team, or the logo. And these all work the same. So for this, I'm just going to be demonstrating with the player image. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's just going to pause when it gets to the point of scaling the image to the template, and it allows you to customize the placement and the scaling as well. So you can rescale or place. Now if you see where it's kind of jerky and it kind of jerks and snaps into place, then under the view, if you uncheck this snap, it was off right now, but if it's checked on, depending on what you have in your template, it could try to snap to the layers or the document bounds. So if you find it's jerky, then just uncheck that snap. Then you just place it and scale where you want. And when you're ready, you just click the checkbox and it will move on to the next image. And then if you ever try to hit the cancel button or hit escape, you'll get this message. And that's because the cancel or escape checkbox would abort the plugin. So that's why I programmed it to catch this error and then give you this message. And it's just telling you you have to use the checkbox and not the cancel button. So even if the placement looks fine, just accept it where it's at. And one other thing I'll point out here is you see this already sets the placement and the scaling percentage. So you see we're at 79% on our scaling, and that is from the original. So this is the original scaling on your image. We're not doing rescaling. It's pausing at the first initial scaling. And the reason why this is important is because that way you don't have to use a smart object because we're not rescaling. I'll explain that in a moment here. So let's just get through these last two, and then we'll start this back up. And I'm going to explain the stop on finished image, and then talk about the smart objects for a minute. Okay, so with this pause on scale here, you do not need to use this smart objects if this is the only time you're scaling, because again, this is scaling from the original image. To use smart objects, what this is mainly used for is if you ever think you're going to need to rescale, which is generally not the case. But if you ever think you might have to rescale after these initial scaling are done, then you could use the smart objects. That way it's non-destructive. So first going to demonstrate this pause on finished image, just so I can show you the difference here. And then we'll do both of them together and then talk about the smart object a little bit more. Okay, with the pause on finished image, this is not pausing with the scale step. This is pausing after it's put the entire composite together. And you see we have the continue batch button. And as soon as we click this, it will continue on to the next image. But it's pausing so that we can access Photoshop and do anything we want. So we can scale the player, or we can do any other edits that we need to do. We can edit text, add layers, touch the image up, just whatever it is we want. But if we scale at this point, if I hit Control T, now you'll notice the scaling goes to 100%, where before, remember, it was a different image, but it was 79% on that last one we did. But this is 100%. That's because that first scaling has already been applied, and it's been applied destructively because we did not have smart objects checked. So if we needed to upscale, at this point that downscaling has already been applied. So if we upscale too much, you lose a little bit of quality. If you go a little bit, it's probably unnoticeable. But if you think you'll need to upscale by a decent amount, then you could check that smart objects box, which I'll demonstrate. Actually, I'm going to demonstrate that right now so that we can talk about that. So just going to cancel this. Let me hit stop batch here. So let's restart this back up, and now let's turn both of these on. So now it's going to pause twice. It's going to pause to scale the player, and it's going to pause on the finished image. Just so I can do two different tests, I'm going to leave it without the smart objects on and just show you the difference so you can kind of understand what these smart objects do. All right, so now it is applying this. This is the first step, which is the stop to scale. After we do this, it's also going to stop at the end so we can edit the photo. I'm going to scale this way down just to make this very obvious, to where if you're not using a smart object and you rescale afterwards, you can see the effect. Okay, so now it's on the second pause step, which is the pause on finished image. So this was not scaled as a smart object. So now if we need to scale this, and that's one thing too, is these scale handles will be really far on the outside. I'm not going to get into the reason why that is, but the program has to do it that way to be able to place your image in the correct spot. In any case, you're never going to downscale by that much, so this typically, you'll never see these handles so far out there. But all right, now you see that since it's actually not as bad as I thought. I mean, it's pretty blurry, but I thought it was going to be worse because we downsized that so much. But since we scaled that image way down and we did not use smart objects, and then we went and rescaled that up, you can see the image has become blurry from that upscaling. Now I'm going to demonstrate now the difference for what the smart objects do. Now the same thing, I'm going to leave both the pause buttons in there, and then we're going to use smart objects this time. Now I don't recommend using smart objects most of the time. Like I say, it's only really needed if you are going to be upscaling after the initial scaling. And really, it's only if you're upscaling by a decent amount will you ever notice. Okay, so now we have applied our first scaling. Let me get this back in the center here. You can see how small the image is now. But you can see this little smart object icon. This was brought in as a smart object this time. So now if we upscale it, and I agree, these handles way outside the edges. It's kind of annoying, but again, that's how it has to do it to place it correctly. But the only reason they're so far outside is because of how far we downscaled it before. You'll never be doing something this extreme in your job, so you should never see that like we did there. All right, so now that we zoom in here, you can see that this image it's tack sharp still. And so that downscaling and then upscaling did not affect any quality because it got brought in as a smart object initially. So that is what the smart object does. And again, I recommend never using the smart object unless you need to upscale after the initial scaling. Again, this initial scaling, if this is the only scaling you do are these checkboxes, you do not need the smart objects. And it's only needed if you're, again, planning to upscale or do it by any large amount, really. Now, I guess that's not the only case you'll need it. You would want to use this smart object, and I'll need to demonstrate this in a different video, but if you saved your template with some smart filters automatically applied to your image, which people are not normally doing, but if you did, it would bring those effects into your new image when it drops in, but that will only take effect if you're using the smart object option, because it won't be able to apply a smart effect to your new image if it's not a smart object. Again, that's a topic for a whole other video, and it's not something that people normally do anyway. But that would be the other reason you would want to use the smart objects. Anyway, I hope this clarifies what this pause to scale does. This is very useful if you want to customize the placement and still run with a batch environment. This is a great way to do that.